Data file found. Audio speech. Jean-Rodrigue Marden. Forefather conflict at the Blue Line. So, once the bombardment ceased, the airplanes, perhaps because the ships had run out of shells or because they felt it had done its job, spent the last of the fuel in some strafing runs at us. Our own hastily readied guns now fired flak into the air. We stationed men with rapid-fire weapons around those guns to shoot down any shrikes that may have strayed too near, and when few we did manage to shoot down one shrike, from what I understand. I remember some men holding it up. But in its falling, the gun of the shrike, I should say, landed upon an ammunition pile and destroyed that howitzer, took part of its crew with it. Drone strikes have a fear unique to warfare, much akin to artillery. It is easy to hate the artillerist that you cannot see and envision terrible things about him, but you have a sense that he is doing his job and he's applying himself to the task that he is a soldier. It's quite different when you see men that you have come to love and respect being robbed of their lives by another man sitting safely behind a desk miles away, sipping his coffee, essentially playing an old-world video game as he kills you. By 14:30 hours, I noticed that I was no longer receiving any radio signals from the stations north of my army. I brought this to the attention of my commanders in general. The northern part of the Blue Line was the newest and the weakest point. It had been believed to be a target that was not of any interest. Frantically, we began rotating guns and rocket launchers to cover our northern flank. We were barely in time. For a little past 1500 hours, I saw the first glint of light reflecting off of metal lances. Your lancers, on their horses, had ridden into view. They were recording our positions. Artillery crews begged to be allowed to send out at least some mortars to slay them, but they were forbidden. Our generals had finally realized how much ammunition they had already wasted, and knew they had to make every shot count. By 15:45 hours, the radio report came in that reinforcements were speeding to us and would be with us before nightfall. But your aircraft spotters must have alerted the MMR of the same, seeing that army on the march. And on your side, a decision to attack was made before those reinforcements could arrive. Now, historians will tell you that the attack began at 1700 hours, but I always held that it actually began at 1604 hours, when a radio broadcast blared over all of our receivers. It went, "Men of the Army Grand Imperial, this is Eurydice J of the Republican Army. Surrender your arms in position or expect no quarter. You have 5 minutes to comply." This is one of the things that happens in war. We want to see it the way we would have liked for it to have gone down. And many Republican historians, particularly those of the Reclaimers, refuse to believe that Eurydice J would give an order to surrender or expect no quarter, that we would slay all of you. They believe that such an order shows a callous regard for human life, and so J could not have possibly issued it. But as I say, I was there. I was working the radio. 5 minutes and a few seconds later, the rockets began to fall. The rockets were not aimed, as we thought they would be, at our artillery, but at the trenches. Their arcs had been plotted to burst over the trenches and spray the gullies with burning fuel. We found ourselves retreating into our bunkers. Our artillery tried to counter battery fire, but the attempt was useless. The rockets, fired from improvised launchers, had not been meant to survive. And while the big guns focused on destroying those rocket launchers, the MMR formed up in a battle line and began advancing behind our own post-apocalypse era version of tanks. 20-foot-tall lumbering giants made of metal walked in front of the advancing MMR line. Junk bots, they are called. Such a unregal name. When we sighted them, we instantly began throwing everything we could at them. Every rocket, every large gun piece, every Gatling laser, anything we could find. And I think we managed to knock all but excuse me. I think we managed to knock only 2 of them down. Our tactics were proper. We were aiming for the legs, trying to concentrate fire, but just something 20 feet tall and several tons moving at almost 8 to 9 miles an hour on a run to match its infantry. It's terrifying. The sound is not quite like anything else you could imagine. Unable to concentrate the fire as well as we should, for your airplanes were still strafing the trenches and bombing us, distracting us. The decision was made to have our guns that we had hidden fire upon the robots, and this, of course, revealed them. As their muzzles was still smoking from the first volley, which largely had gone awry, the Shrikes moved in. Rockets were fired into positions, and none of our guns survived. I still remember the great plumes of smoke behind us and in front of us. It was terrible to behold. The green haze your troops were emerging from, the black and orange ruin of our weapons. It felt like being stuck between 2 flaming walls of hell. I could hear sergeants in the trenches yelling out the range as your gentlemen approached, for on our approach to the blue line we had marked out the range with ranging sticks. When the Republicans were at 400 yards, we began receiving some of the infantry's steady volume of pop-up shots and advancing cover fire. A few fools who did not have the sense to remain in cover, hoping they could get another shot in on the warbots, quickly paid for their folly. With our own rockets running low, we were soon having to rely upon grenade launchers. The smoke would part for a moment whenever one of the great jump box fired its lasers, and we could see the shadowy outline of men running behind them. From our lines I could hear whistles blowing as officers signaled to their squads when to fire. From the secondary line I could hear more ranges being called out. 300 yards, 200 yards, volley. Over this, the MMR junk bots, now close enough, were blaring a song over their loudspeakers, a song that I am sure you all know, for your armed services are certainly brave and competent, and seem to have a wicked sense of humor. I would have preferred it if they had had higher quality musical tastes, for it is one thing to be asked to give your life for your country, it is another to have to make that final sacrifice while being serenaded by a cheesy rock song with altered lyrics. The song in question being, I got something deep inside of me. Courage is the thing that keeps us free. I am a real Republican. Fight for the rights of every man. I am a real Republican. Fight for what's right. Fight for your life. Yes, I see you tapping along and giggling. At least the anthem of the Lansing Republic, though it does include some inflammatory language about the Monarchie de Quebec, at least it has always had a tradition of being a marching song. But to watch your fellow soldiers dying as your opponents play a wrestler's entrance theme, it was one of the great surrealities of that war. From the hill's crest where the radio was stationed, I had a better view of the battle than many of my brothers in arms. And as the ganders neared, the advance began to have a sawtooth-like appearance. When your first power armor suits vaulted over the front trench line, it was clear that we had lost. In the melee that formed in the trenches, the flamers that the PA suits carried detonated ammunition stocks, and their heavy armor resisted all gunfire in close combat that we could muster. Our own PA suits, now fewer in number, could not stem the tide. Between the junk bots, the power armor, and the MMR picking up the stragglers, there was nothing we could do. I watched as my general jumped into his own Legionnaire power armor suit and ordered a retreat over its loudspeaker. But try as I might, I could not get the radio signals to go through. I could not signal for aid or issue any orders. I remember verbally calling to the general, only to see him in our position being overrun by ghouls. At first I thought they must have been ghouls attracted to the smell of the battle by so many men dying, but then I noticed they were all wearing fresh Gander uniforms. This is where, although I said earlier I do not deal in conspiracy theory, I can give testimony to a historical fact that has gone down as a conspiracy theory. I speak of the Black Hat Brigade. You see, our Foxtail Special Forces that had lagged behind had not been fighting a delaying action. They had been spewing forth a strange green mist that we saw, a green mist filled full of irradiated bacteria. I realize that many people, even Ganders that were present at the battle, refute this, but I saw the Black Hat Brigade. I saw the Legion of the Damned. I saw them. They had been men once, just hours before perhaps, and now they were ravening beasts. I can only assume that they had been troops that had not been equipped with gas masks, and when they inhaled the irradiated bacteria, it had changed their DNA. In the Grand Army, perhaps only 1 in 3 of us had a gas mask or an EVA suit. From what I have heard at the time, amongst the MMR, it was worse, perhaps only as few as 1 in 6. Such are the realities of the logistics of post-apocalyptic warfare. I drew my pistol and tried to fire, but I was too afraid. And I remember watching as one of the ghouls found the cycling ring on the general's power armor, and he twisted it, and it opened, and the ghouls fell upon him, and they tore the man apart while he was still inside his suit. Give me a moment. And to my shame, lest they find me, I ran. In my disorientation, I thought I was running away from the battle. Instead, I ran right into the secondary trench line. And that is where the fighting now was. Firing lines of men volleyed at approaching power armor suits, hoping they could find some weakness, purely by the volume of the shot. Men were engaged in hand-to-hand combat, stabbing with knives and bayonets, and somewhere in the fight from the ghouls, I had lost my pistol. I was defenseless. A grenade detonated in front of me, and I watched as the 5 men in front of me that were volleying at a suit vaporized in a green flash of light from the plasma. Their bodies disintegrated, and the green gloop that had once been their flesh splashed over me. I must have been screaming. The ground trembled and shook, and a Gander in power armor looked down at me. A hammer in his hands was coated in blood. "Pretend to be dead, kid," he said to me. But I was still screaming. He left me there in the trench. I was trying to wipe away the goo that had once been my fellows, when another Gander infantryman, seeing me, neared me and stabbed me. Now, I realize that may sound ignoble to you, decades removed from the conflict, but I'm not criticizing the man who speared me. In war, men are under pressure that nothing else can compare to, and this was a battle unlike any other I have read about. That man who stabbed me likely, even to this day, is unaware that he even stabbed me. You often just act in such close combat, and the memory fills in the details later when you are far removed. His bayonet took me in the upper lung. A very pleasant experience, made more terrifying, that was accompanied by slow asphyxiation, I assure you. And as I spent the rest of the battle in the trench trying not to die, I had a second encounter. 30 minutes later, a Gander medic passed by me. He looked at me and spit at me, and then walked onward. Another quarter of an hour went by, as men and women in Gander green marched over me. I gave up all hope that I would be aided. I fumbled for my crucifix and tried to remember the Hail Mary, but my mouth, it stumbled over the Latin. I had not been very religious, and so it was disused. I remember between the gasping and the fear that I was crying, for there was no priest nearby, and I was sure even at that young age I had some sins on my soul that prevent me from achieving paradise. I started blubbering my native language. War is surreal. This is another one of those surrealities. I was shocked to hear the French I was babbling in returned. A sock captain approached me. She was a chaplain. She was adorned with the preaching bands of the Novapax church. She approached me with her palms open to show she had no weapon and spoke to me in my mother tongue. "Where are you from, boy?" "Saint Emile," I responded. "Well, don't panic. You'll see it again, mon ami," she said. And with that, she injected me with a stim pack that surely must have been issued to her for her own use. But in Christian charity, she decided that I needed the aid more than she. This is how I met Chaplain Nikoti Nekamoa, and how I became her prisoner. And it was from her side that I would see the rest of the war. You may have noticed the books on sale outside. Oh, stop the chuckle. I may be Quebecois, but I am a thoroughly ardent capitalist. And in this case, all the proceeds go to war relief for veterans, with some small stipend for my traveling fees. And it is often said that I have embellished Chaplain Nakamoa's role in the events that happened later. But I assure you, I'm a historian, not a novelist. Everything that happened in that account is what I saw. Later that day, I would be introduced to Eurydice J. by Captain Nakamoa, and it was at her side that I helped to interrogate prisoners for them. Though the battle conduct of the MMR was ruthless, I can testify that no one should contest how they conducted themselves in regards to the prisoners after hostilities had ended. In these interrogations, I was witness to the confessions of many foxtails. They revealed that the king himself had indeed promised to every raider he could find that they could set up holdings for themselves and take as much booty and slaves as they wished in the land ahead of them. The mental trauma that they're survivors of their tender mercies, it surely was as great as anything as we in the trenches had to endure. For the next month, the MMR ground its way towards Toronto, and the King de Quebec had no other quality troops between Toronto and the Michigan militia and regulars. So he sent forth proclamations by radio for partisans and militias to gather to resist the advance. There has been some criticism of the MMR's choices during this advance, that they should have held the line and sued for peace terms proper and from a proper opponent. But those that criticize do not understand the king of the time's nature. A rad scorpion is infinitely more trustworthy than that man. Yes, there were many hastily organized fortifications and militias that the MR had to smash, and yes, there were many fortification homes that Eurydice J. burned in his march. Mercy had become something of a weight. If we expended too much of it, carried too much of it, we would not be able to get to where we needed to be fast enough. But nor did we deviate from a straight line. And you may notice at this point I'm using the term we, because with conversations with Jay and Nakamoa, I switched loyalties to the Republican cause. 2 days from Toronto's ruins, we saw the blue flag with its 4 white lilies. Troops from the farthest side of Quebec had been double marched to reach us. No one had as yet had time to dig any hard trench lines, and it looked like perhaps there would be a field battle. But then a single round was fired from a Quebec gun, and one lone suit of power armor of the Legionnaires d'Imperial approached with a white flag. Jay went out to meet them, accompanied by General Fredericks. When Jay returned, he informed us that the king's representatives would be arriving that evening and they would like to discuss terms of a peace. Jay wished to continue the fight immediately, but he was overruled by General Fredericks. So we settled in for a peace treaty, meaning we began digging our own trenches. By the fall of evening, we had a serviceable, if not exactly comfortable, trench line. Rifles had been laid in triangle stands, men smoked 3 to a match, and cook fires began to spring up. I remember hearing some tunes. Thankfully, not the bad Republican fight song. And a sense that there would be no battle, or perhaps that cooler heads might prevail, began to steal upon us. Jay had no such optimism. He turned out to be right. I was sitting next to Nakamoa when the grenades were rolled into our tent. All the command staff was there. Fortunately, Jay was still wearing his T-51B power armor. He got between us and the blasts. The fragmentation grenade shredded part of his cheek. The Foxtails had tried to assassinate us, and they partially succeeded, having rendered Fredericks useless. Yurdes J., Nakamoa, and I stormed out of the tent, and with some junior officers we made a circle. We knew we could not dare remain stationary, and I confess I do not remember everything as clearly about that night as I would like to. But I remember we began a close quarters fight through the night, and when we had defeated the Foxtail raiding party that had slipped in amongst our encampment, we turned on the hastily led militia that was in front of us. Now, night fighting is a dangerous thing. Without good fire discipline, you have a high chance of hitting your allies. But we managed. In the momentary illumination of a laser bolt or barrel flash, I could see that we were killing every single one of the men that had been sent against us. And I mean all of them. There was no quarter from that point to the point on when we were done. The king had managed to assemble about a dozen working pre-war armored vehicles at the end of his army. But these availed him for naught. For before they could even fire upon us, our power armor had quickly crossed the ground. There is a sound that those of us on the post-apocalyptic battlefield know. That sound of metal being ripped apart as hydraulic muscles pull at hatches. That sound of men screaming as grenades are dropped into their formerly safe vehicles. The king again and the generals had not read well. They did not realize why large armored vehicles were on the way out in warfare before the Great War. Power armor is a fast, terrible thing, and now many Quebecois were paying that price again for that lesson. Think of it. A man, a single man, more mobile and as heavily armed as a tank, with the strength of a god of war. I have seen power armor bend the barrels of tanks. I have seen it rip wheels and treads off their sides. Not to mention what the terrible armor does even in close combat, when its fists hit flesh. When the Quebecois reinforcements arrived the next day, they were distressed to see they were under the sights of their own guns, for we had taken what guns remained. To ensure their cooperation, as their heralds approached, along the trail, heads of all the men we had slain were laid on handkerchiefs. It was a bloody and barbaric display, worthy of Vlad Tepes or some feudal samurai. But it was intended to break the will of the Quebecois to fight, and it was effective. For when these heralds, men used to, well, let us call it a more genteel form of war if such a thing is possible, saw what Jay was willing to do, and that the words "no quarter" had been spoken with meaning, all their fighting spirit broke. And I should still remark that no quarter is still the, shall we say, unofficial motto of MMR service people. and they use it to denote a task that they despise, but one that must be done with all their power. None of us wanted to march all the way to Quebec City that day, but we were willing to do it, if that was what it took to break the enemy's will to fight. After what we had seen the enemy was willing to do to us in the field, we had all resolved to meet him just as ruthlessly as he prosecuted us. Yet even over that gruesome sight, we were not the monsters that many Quebecois historians have painted us to be. No, Eurydice J. was not drinking the blood of the fallen soldiers out of the hollowed-out skull of his enemies, as he dictated the terms of the peace. We had been working all night, and he was thirsty. He was sipping on a Nuka-Cola cherry. No, we did not demand that the Quebecois citizens in the zones of our invasion become citizens of the Lansing Republic. The mass migration of former serfs of the king was a flight all their own. And after seeing how gently the king was willing to treat his subjects, can any of us here today blame them? And no, the foxtail attaché to the heralds was not shot in cold blood by Captain Nakamoa. It was I. I recognized him as the leader of the foxtail band that released the irradiating gas. And I knew that he would return to Quebec and live a life of luxury, while thousands would have to suffer because of his actions. I skinned the captain's automatic from her side holster, ran up to him when his back was turned, and I emptied the entire magazine into him just to be sure. If you must kill a man, be thorough. And no, I was not chided for my action. Everyone was past caring about one more body on that particular field. And no, I have never regretted it. And I sincerely hope that there is a God and that there is a hell, so that bastard roasts there for all eternity. Sorry. I get a little emotional sometimes about the conflict. As I said earlier, we Quebecois, we are raised, you see, to hold personal honor and conduct, the knightly virtues, if you will, and Christian morality above all else save loyalty to our king. We are raised to think of ourselves as part of a whole, and that all the actions of one reflect upon the other. He had shamed us, this foxtail, and I shan't even mention his name that his memory may be forgotten. But now I had also placed myself beyond the pale. I had committed murder. No, I do not accept what some have said, that it was a forgivable lapse because of the stress of combat. I knew that what I was doing was wrong, but I did it so that no one else would suffer his evil. I was granted clemency and allowed to become a citizen. I have been a citizen of the Lansing Republic ever since. For 3 decades, I assisted the militia and the regulars in translating radio signals we intercepted from Quebec City and the armies of the king. And though I was never allowed to enlist, I was granted the Black Star, the Republic's highest honor to civilians, for my work in decoding Quebecois codes. I cannot say what happened to the survivors of the irradiated gas attacks, the Black Hat Brigade. But I hope they have found some peace. And yes, I should note there is also a tradition amongst the MMR of a battle honor called the Black Hat. You will see it soon no more, as it is something only people on the revenge march have the right to wear, specifically those of us that were at those battles. Now I beg you give me a minute or two, for I've been talking for quite some time, and I'm a bit parched, and I find that as I have aged, my stamina is no longer what it once was. End of audio recording. Revenge March.